Welcome back. This is a continuing conversation, as we like to call it, between Pastor Paul and myself, Paul Thompson from Huntersville UMC and Steve Autrey from Denver United Methodist Church. And we're weighing into the world of global politics. That's kind of scary.
That is a little scary.
Now, what we would like to do is give some of the background for how we got and how we seem to stay in conflict in the Middle East, especially around this land of Israel. So we worked our way up to first century towards the time and birth of Christ. So when Jesus is born, he's born into what's more or less a province of Rome.
Yeah, so
a vassal state.
All of the gospel writers placed the ministry, the time of Jesus, within the context of the Roman rule. Roman so-and-so emperor was ruling here and the governor was so-and-so. What we know is that Jesus was born into the tumult. He was born into the turmoil of Israel constantly at odds. There was this cauldron of hatred and activity between the people of Israel, the Jewish people, the Romans, and that finally comes to a real head by 67
Well, and I just want to give a little bit more information there. And the part of the anger was because some of in Israel were thought to be collaborators with Rome. And so what Rome would do, Rome doesn't want to be at war all the time because wars are expensive. So Rome in these far-flung districts would set up or allow a vassal government. This is how Herod becomes governor. Herod is not strictly speaking Roman. He claims to be Jewish. But they set him up, and basically the idea is you keep things calm and cool over here. You keep taxes coming in. You keep the money rolling. You do whatever you want.
Israel was allowed to practice its faith as long as it did not come into direct conflict
and that's why
with Rome.
That's why we get he's known as King Herod. Strictly speaking, Caesar's the real king, but he could be. He's like a branch manager with a lot of power. And so he runs the state of Israel, Jerusalem, the political state of Israel, pretty much as he wishes, as long as, again, he keeps the money coming. And that means setting up a temple system whereby the priest wouldn't cause any problems. And the priests, for their part, felt like if we can just hang on to the temple, we can hang on to God. Herod, by the way, there's a succession of Herods. It's more like being ruled by a family. Mm-hmm. They had begun rebuilding the temple and had developed it into this grand, amazing structure. I mean, like one of the wonders of the world by the time of Jesus, which is part of why the disciples are so in awe of the temple when they see it.
So in Mark chapter 13 and a couple other places in Matthew and Luke, the disciples are walking one day. They are probably on the Mount of Olives where they can see the grandeur of the temple. And they're just marveling how beautiful that is. That's where God is. We're really taken by that. Jesus says, that place? I tell you, some of you are going to live to see the destruction of that. Not one stone left upon another. Go back and read Mark chapter 13. We often call that the little apocalypse. But Jesus foresees, he prophesies that the temple is going to be destroyed. That temple is destroyed in the Roman-Jewish War of 68 to 70 AD. And the temple has never been rebuilt since.
Right, and what brings this on is that within that world of Jesus, there were a group of people known as zealots. They wanted to fight Rome. They wanted to see an uprising like the Maccabees had. And so they were advocating and pushing for war. It's very likely that some of Jesus's followers were zealots.
Yeah, we know that
James and John, sons of thunder.
They would have absolutely stuck a knife in any Roman that they had an opportunity.
And even more than that, they hated collaborators. So can you imagine the tension in the camp whenever Jesus calls Matthew to be a disciple? Matthew, who's a tax collector, is a collaborator. Oh, by the way, this is your new brother, Matthew. Right? Yeah. And sometimes we think about how we all, I don't know. To me, that's an interesting thing that Jesus does to show us that he's the one we follow, right? There's even, I just think when we're talking about getting along with each other, that Jesus would bring in someone that he knew the other people would absolutely hate. So that's pretty remarkable, and it's also pretty remarkable because Jesus spent a lot of time with these tax collectors and collaborators, and he has a bigger picture, though. He has a different way of seeing the world. That temple's nothing to Jesus because he's seen, he understands the realms of heaven and glory. But there's even some talk that Judas was a zealot, and that one theory is that Judas betrayed Jesus, hoping to spur Jesus to action.
So that he would show that he is the military,
right.
Messianic guy that they had all been looking for, that he would
lead the rebellion.
Lead the rebellion against Rome and kick Rome out and restore back to that Davidic promise.
Back to the splendor of David and Solomon. Yeah. And of course that didn't happen. But so years after, like you said, 67, some 30 years or so after Jesus' death, the Zealots, they managed to instigate a revolt against Rome, and there's an uprising.
And it does not go well for
the people of Israel.
Yeah.
So the Romans have been fighting this pesky little problem for so long, finally go, that's it. And they do what empires do with outposts that don't behave. They leveled the place.
And again, in 67 to 70, the temple is destroyed. But it's not just the temple, it's a real destruction of the whole area. It is a really putting Rome's heavy thumb on the people. And for the next umpteen years, basically there is a very small Jewish presence in that realm.
There's no political entity known as Israel.
It is.
There's not a geographical. There's not a political state with a defined geographical border that could be called Israel. Israel exists in the Jewish people.
Only in name. And as we've known, this term diaspora, it's the diaspora had occurred back in those 587 BC when Jews were spread out all over the world. And we know the Jewish people moved to remote places all over the world. A Jewish population in Russia, a Jewish population in Germany, a Jewish population literally
Ethiopia.
All over the world, Ethiopia.
So after 70, then this is another diaspora where the Jewish people move. And when they move, they set up their synagogues, they maintain their culture, they maintain their religious identity, but part of their religious identity is always to think about the land of Israel. And in particular, the understanding of what it means to have a temple. Their primary image for their faith is gone. And so the Romans just flattened it.
So this will set the conversation for tomorrow. But basically, what we want to establish is there is no Israel state. There is no Jewish presence as a state from basically the time of Rome all the way through till we're going to get to tomorrow, to after World War II and the creation of this state called Israel in 1948. So this is where it really starts to hit home for us. After 1948, that's when we start to get into the modern day issues.
So thank you for putting up with us. We're not experts. We're just playing some on a podcast.
And we'll talk a little bit more tomorrow about our experience there and kind of help put that into contrast.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.